Hey everyone, Adam Tracy, and I wanted to deconstruct Pump.fun and other meme coin platforms like it. And if you go back to like the ICO craze of like 18-ish, right, you could recall, as I do, there was a lot of these different launch pads, right? And ultimately all of them got taken down by some regulator because of some key issues. So, what is different today versus then, right? And just by way of background, Pump.fun works as this meme coin launchpad where you go on, you can create a Solana based token with like minimal effort in minutes, and then there's a market. Now the market isn't driven by what you would see in a centralized exchange. It's not an automatic market maker in place. There's a bonding curve mechanism, right? So as I've spoken about before, you have this sort of liquidity built into the bonding curve, meaning where the more people buy, the higher the price goes. And the proceeds of the sale of those tokens go into this kind of locked, it's hard to say it's a liquidity pool. It's sort of like that. And then when they're sellers, that amount of Solana is released to satisfy that order, right? And then at some point in time, and obviously people sell, the price goes back down the bonding curve, right? It goes up. And at some point, I think it's 69,000 market cap or whatever, the token automatically gets moved to like Radium or another DEX. And at that point, it's subject to an automatic market maker, right? And so that's sort of like the mechanics behind it, okay? And the primary issues with it, right, are the same issues that you saw in 18, right? It's so easy. It's like so absolutely fucking easy to create. So it's a joke. Like you go on it. I mean, you could tell people just like are just making it, just for literally like not to. They think it's going to work just because it's funny, right? Boob coin or whatever the hell it is. So in any event, you have this, and if you were trying to emulate it or wonder like what could possibly go wrong with it, well, it's kind of 2018 revisited to some degree, but with some greater emphasis on new areas of law that have come down via court decisions, right? Because we haven't regulated crypto in any way, shape, or form. We're just relying on the courts to do it. Whatever you think of that, that's how it's happening. So number one is security tokens, right? Like you can create these tokens, right? You can go on Pump.fun and create a token and not have to delineate in any great detail what it actually entitles the holder to receive, right? So I could very easily create a security token because at the time of like creation, I don't have to basically commit to not being a security, right? And so right off the bat, and you've seen some like state level lawsuits or like in the UK, it's been banned, things like that, where there's been security tokens put through Pump.fun and they're making a market, albeit not via automatic market maker bonding curve. And it is effectively acting as a unregistered alternative trading system or a national securities exchange of which it doesn't have a license, right? It doesn't have any licenses. So right off the bat, that could be problematic because like the gatekeeping is very low, okay? And they don't know what's effectively on there. So that's the first part, right? The second part is the manipulation. And yes, like overwhelmingly, you're talking meme tokens. You're not going to see a lot of like utility to it. You're not going to see a lot of, definitely not anything, most that's indicative of security, things like that, because we don't have anything, right? But what you're seeing is this application of what would be like traditional securities or commodities laws to manipulation, right? The manipulation of price, the manipulation of trading volume, things like that, which there is no like particular prohibition or law on the books because a meme coin is like effectively nothing. But you get into areas of like consumer fraud, and you get into state level and common law levels of fraudulent inducements, things like that, plus the application of like, securities fraud, stuff like that. So this overwhelming like urge to, pump these, right? I mean, by virtue of the name, Pump.fun, right? Like that can conceivably create issues not only for you as the issuer, but also for the exchange or a launch pad like Pump.fun, right? Because you are like facilitating price manipulation, right? Albeit it's a very gray area, right? Where like, who knows? And overwhelmingly, like, yeah, I read something that's like 99.99 don't graduate from Pump.fun to like a real deck. So it's kind of like, who really cares, right? So you're talking small money. It's not going to be some on a lot of people's radar. But that's a major, major concern. So like if you're going to do it, you have to taper down what your messaging is, what your marketing is, right? And what you're going to like effectively say and use to induce people to purchase the token, right? And then finally, just from a kind of broader perspective, right? When you're talking about like bonding curves and liquidity pools, right? You have to consider that, while it's all, driven by algorithm, and like you can say, well, no, it's like it's out of our hands. Well, someone created that bonding curve. You know what I mean? And you're using it and you know it's available. And the proceeds of sales go into this like liquidity pool. Well, that triggers a lot of issues concerning custody, right? Price discovery, things of that nature, which, split, right? Like on the custody side, you have, do I require certain state licenses to do this, right? Because I'm holding funds and I'm acting as a de facto market maker, right? Because I'm filling like, I'm filling sales with the proceeds from that liquidity pool. And so you have that whole angle of like licensure, which is very vague, right now. Like you don't know what you need, and like maybe this new act would kind of clarify, but it's really always state driven. And so you don't really know. Also, the problem with the bonding curve is that you can't stop it, right? You can't like manipulate it. And if you do attempt to, well, then it's de facto, I mean, it's manipulation on top of manipulation, right? So you're kind of stuck with this mechanism that is meant to preserve liquidity, but you have no control over it, and any attempt to control it is like unequivocally manipulation, right? And in theory, you're not necessarily relying on traditional securities fraud, commodities fraud laws, but you have to look at what common law, state law, things of that nature together with, if it's an outright fraud, money laundering, wire fraud, which is this huge catch-all, right? And so it's a great thing. It's fun, right? Like, people can fool around with it, whatever. And these meme coins, they're all rug pulls and whatever, but it's this little, casino in a way. But it exists in this like total void of regulation, right? And it's benefited from a stark change in regulatory approach, right, from one administration to another. But it's not something that, long term could you see it viably existing without licensure. And then you, as the issuer, need to be aware of what you are effectively getting into, right? Like if you're the one who's creating this token, no matter what you're doing, like, whether the exchange is proper or not, you're utilizing that. And so in turn, you share some risk, right? So that is the meme coin Launchpad sort of deconstructed. It's a great business. It's super easy to set up, but you have to consider like what you're doing now, how you can police, issuers in this kind of wild environment, which right now they can't, and then what may come down the pipeline. So that is Pump.fun and its progeny. If you have any questions, obviously you know where to find me, adamtracy.io. Talk to you next time. Cheers.